Hey there, Internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session on the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we sit down with guests to talk about a Disney Plus offering of their choosing. This show is made possible entirely by the support of patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. So if you like the show, you can support us over there, and we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course, we'd love it if you like, subscribe, rate, and review the show, and share it with your friends. Joining me today, we have making her debut on That D Plus Show, Jazz Foster from That Nerdy Site. How you doing, Jazz?
I'm okay. Getting by. How are you, Trev?
Yeah, just trying to kind of take it one day at a time right now. I can appreciate that.
Working on surviving.
With everything going on in the world right now. Yeah. So we are going to be talking this week about Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief. So tell me, Jazz, why did you were throwing out a couple ideas. Why did we land on this one ultimately?
I'm going to blame Logan because I do that for a lot of things.
That's fair.
You're right. I was going back and forth on a couple things that I saw on Browse, and I mentioned them in our little Slack chat. And Logan immediately was like, "That's a bad movie," and I was like, "Cool, then we're gonna watch it." And that was it. Yeah. So thanks, Logan.
Yeah. What's your history with Percy Jackson? Because one of the things you had talked about was like reasons why it might be a bad movie, being that it's a bad adaptation of a good book series. So are you a fan of the book series then?
I am. I'm a huge fan.
Nice.
My best friends and I all read the series together in, I guess middle school to high school. Book one was a summer reading book for me at some point. And it really hooked me, which is kind of rare for summer reading. I think we kind of slogged through summer reading, or we did in school.
Yeah, but, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, it's the only summer reading book that I was like, yeah, hell yeah. So we read the whole thing. I loved it. I think it's a really well-crafted series. And it does a really good job with the mythology, and I was really passionate about mythology at the time.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back and rewatch the movie and see, like, we saw it in theaters, my friends and I, and we thought it was terrible, and I wanted to know if we thought it was terrible because it's a bad adaptation of a great book, or if it's just a bad movie, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Greek mythology and stuff, and most things related to Greek mythology personally, but this is one that because of just like the age I was, like I was graduating college with my second degree when this was coming out, so I was a little old for Percy Jackson and the Olympians, I think.
Never too old for a young adult book.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of missed this train of young adult stuff. Weirdly though, like I ended up reading and loving The Hunger Games a couple years later. But yeah, this one just had kind of passed me by. But the one thing I really knew about this, I found out years later. Basically, my sister lived in Nashville for a little while. And I went out and visited her for a few days for like the 1 year that she was out there. And one of the places she took me to like go for sightseeing was the Parthenon. And in that whole, like, while we were there being tourists at the Parthenon, they had like a whole dedicated section of the place now is dedicated to Percy Jackson and the Olympians filmed here, and like talking about kind of the whole idea behind the Parthenon having been like a leftover from a World's Fair out there and stuff. And it was just, I was like, this is definitely not something I ever knew about or had ever thought about being in Nashville. But yeah, so that was like my one link to this. And then I think I've seen part of Sea of Monsters. I at least knew enough about Sea of Monsters to know that I made a joke in my notes as I was watching the movie. When we get to the end and they show Hermes and stuff, I was like, so they hadn't cast Nathan Fillion as Hermes yet.
It's so great that you mentioned that, because I watched it and I was like, oh yeah, my favorite actor's in this, or one of my favorites, Nathan Fillion, and he's not in the first one.
Yeah. And
I was having a really hard time coping with that, because I have this vivid memory of seeing him as Hermes, and so I texted my friends. I was like maybe I'm going crazy, but I would swear. And they were like, oh yeah, he was Hermes in the second movie, which we saw in theaters. And that memory is so repressed that the only thing I remember about that movie is Nathan Fillion as Hermes. I couldn't tell you anything else that happens. Not a fucking clue. Can we swear? But yeah, Nathan, that was the only thing that stuck. And they were like, yeah, we saw that in theaters. Did we? Oh God. So
Yeah, I love that, and yeah, I remember like him being in that and having seen enough of it, maybe on an airplane or something, to know that, or maybe it was just like I was a big enough Nathan Fillion fan that like when clips of his scene started going around the internet, I saw that, and that's how I know it. But when Luke is talking in this movie about like, yeah, say hi to my dad, if you run into him, he's a dick or whatever, I was like, are they setting up Nathan Fillion to be a jerk in the next movie? I don't know. But yeah, it was definitely interesting to kind of have like pieces of this movie known, but having never seen it myself. So yeah, this was my first time watching through it, but like I knew enough about moments because of what I'd seen at the Parthenon in Nashville and stuff. So so yeah, it was.
It's so funny that they're proud of that as well, not just because of the movie itself, but Nashville's not in any of the books.
Yeah,
it's a 5-book run, and it is not like that was fully fabricated for the movie. So it's very funny to me that they're like so happy about that little fun tidbit because it's only relevant to that one movie.
Exactly. Yeah, it's putting eyes on that tourist attraction in particular. So they're like, it's like just like you saw it if you've seen Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief or whatever. Anyway. So let's dive into a little bit of history lesson about this movie. It was originally released February 12th, 2010, so it was kind of one of the Valentine's Day releases that year, alongside Valentine's Day, which was another attempt at striking the kind of gold of Love Actually, but for Valentine's Day instead of Christmas.
Bad movie. Saw that in theaters. Terrible
yeah.
film.
I heard nothing good about it at the time. Outside of like, it's got a lot of celebrities, and then kind of the counter programming that weekend was The Wolfman with Benicio del Toro, and then I remember a movie I remember seeing in theaters and really enjoying was Shutter Island, which came out like a week later. The runtime is a somewhat long hour and 58 minutes.
Sure is.
I remember like taking a break about half an hour in and being like, oh my God, I have so much more of this movie to go. Oh no, what have I done? Yeah. And usually we talk about in the Disney timeline where this falls, but this is one of the things that kind of came up in our conversation where Logan was like, "Is that on Disney Plus? Is that a Disney movie?" And it's not a Disney movie; it's actually a Fox movie. But obviously, the Fox merger happened, and so this was kind of acquired by Disney, and that's why it's on Disney Plus. Sea of Monsters is not, so that's probably got like streaming deals somewhere else for the time being.
Where?
Like I don't know, HBO or Stars or something like that. They've got like weird on and off deals over the years, especially for like the Fox movies that had not been tied up because Disney knew they were doing this thing. But in the Fox timeline, this came in between the Tooth Fairy movie with The Rock that was released January 22nd, 2010, and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which came out on my birthday, March 19th, 2010.
Happy almost birthday, Trev.
Thank you. Yeah, it's got that going for me in a couple days. Good thing I don't have to celebrate with anybody because I can't.
Not going out.
Yeah. In the Disney timeline of things, basically, this would have fallen in between Princess and the Frog, which had come out December 11th, 2009, and then the live-action Alice in Wonderland came out a couple weeks later, March 5th, 2010. So that's kind of putting it in context. And then I looked it up just because I was curious, because I feel like Hunger Games was like the movie that really kicked off like the young adult Maze Runner and Insurgent and all those other series.
Sure,
And so I was like, where did this come out in comparison to that? And this did beat Hunger Games by a couple years because Hunger Games didn't come out until 2012. So this was attempting to kick off kind of a young adult renaissance, and at least it got its second movie out. But yeah, it didn't really drive or thrive too much beyond that.
No.
Yeah. So diving into the roll call for this, the kind of the who's who of the film, you have like it's a surprisingly star-studded and kind of good pedigree cast and crew. You have Chris Columbus as the director, who prior to this had been most famously known for stuff like Home Alone, Mrs. Doubtfire. He had directed the first couple of Harry Potter movies, and he had done Rent in 2005. and then he is since doing this went on to direct Pixels, and something I pulled in just because of you being the guest on this show this week. He's the executive producer for the upcoming Scoob movie.
I wondered how that made it onto the notes.
Yeah. Saw that and I was like, oh, well, I have to bring. There are a couple notes here where I was like, I have to highlight that because Jazz is on here and she's the biggest Scooby-Doo fan I know. And then
absolutely gonna go see that movie, by the way.
Oh yeah, like I
Quarantine
saw.
be damned.
Yeah. The last trailer I saw for it, I think, before I went before Onward, was like it was the new trailer out that kind of goes a little bit more into the story and stuff. And I was like, oh, like, A, I was thinking about you as I was watching it. And then B, I was just like, oh, this is really cool to see kind of the direction that they're taking that in. So that was the first one. Like, I was like, oh, okay, it's cute, but I was never like a huge Scooby-Doo person growing up. But the latest trailer has got me pulled in. So I look forward to whenever we get to see that, whenever it comes out. The last one I pulled in here that just stood out to me as for Chris Columbus is he is the announced director for a Five Nights at Freddy's movie. I don't know if Jazz, if you are familiar with Five Nights at Freddy's, but it is. Yeah, it is basically a like horror series of games that kind of like takes its pride on jump scares of characters that look like basically Chuck E. Cheese creatures, and just like. It's got its cult following, and I'm like, oh, they're making a movie of that? Okay, I'd probably heard about that. I did not hear that somebody with like the pedigree of Chris Columbus was going to be working on that. So
interesting that he's tied to it as well, because I always thought that Five Nights at Freddy's was kind of known for having a really tangled plot, if any. Like, it's a plot you have to solve the mystery of the more you play. And his movies are all, I mean, like, I don't know that he's done a well-known movie that's that much of an intrigue thing. Except for Scoob, obviously, but
and I imagine they're gonna streamline that for a mainstream audience kind of approach to it. But yeah, it jumped out at me as like, oh, I would not have pegged in a million years Chris Columbus, the guy who brought Harry Potter to the big screen to be doing a Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Whatever. He's also like attached to Gremlins 3, so good for him. In terms of the writers, you have Craig Titley, who'd done the screenplay of this, and he had the other big thing of note that I had in here specifically for Jazz was he had the story credit on Scooby-Doo, the 2002 film.
Terrible screenplay.
Yeah, but isn't that one like that was famously like punched up by like J.J. Abrams or Joss Whedon or James Gunn or something, like one of those like big time directors that has like gone on to much better things, like secretly did like a pass at the script of Scooby-Doo, I think.
Oh, probably.
Yeah, I don't remember which one it was.
It actually wasn't awful. I'm just bitter because they made Scrappy-Doo the villain. Spoiler for a movie from 18 years ago, but like that's so dumb. I always thought the sequel was better, and I am definitely in the minority on that, but that's okay.
Yeah. And he also wrote Cheaper by the Dozen in 2003, but like that was his last little bit of writing before hopping onto this in 2010. And then you have Rick Riordan, the story, who's the writer of the book series, who's basically his IMDb credits are just everything attached to any kind of Percy Jackson stuff. He's done web series, or there have been web series and other things outside of these couple films. But
I was reading something. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Little like fun tidbit for you. Riordan actually hated the screenplay, like the script, so much that he never watched the full movie.
Yeah, that's
how the
I have
story
that.
goes anyway. But like it's spoiler here, but it's not true to the book, kind of at all. Yeah, he disliked it so intensely that he just didn't watch the movie, even though it's his movie.
Yeah, exactly. I have a little bit of trivia that I just pulled from IMDb, and it says exactly that. Rick Riordan, who wrote the Percy Jackson books, hated the script for the movie and has never actually seen the full film, as of whenever that note had been made. Pulling, I'm sure, from an interview that he did where he was like, "Yeah, no, I never watched it."
Sure.
It's like his version of The Shining or whatever with that Stephen King notoriously hates the film.
Sure.
As far as the cast of the film, you have Logan Lerman as Percy Jackson, who'd been like doing some acting stuff since being like one of the little kids in The Patriot, that Mel Gibson movie from 2000. But from what I was looking at, it looked like this kind of kicked off his kind of trying to break out. He did The Three Musketeers shortly after this, and then the thing I knew him best from, Perks of Being a Wallflower, came out in like 2012. So, this kind of helped kickstart all that. Brandon T. Jackson, playing Grover, had done Tropic Thunder and the aforementioned Tooth Fairy that had come out like a month before this. He has since gone on to, he had a minor recurring role in BoJack Horseman, is one of his more recent credits that I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. Alexandra Daddario, another one who kind of, this was largely her big breakout role, has gone on to do Texas Chainsaw 3D and Baywatch. The one with The Rock a couple years back, which was very bad, but she was quite nice to look at in that film, so I didn't mind.
Yep.
Jake Abel, who plays Luke, didn't really have too much of note, so I didn't really have anything pulled in for him.
It's so interesting that you say that. I saw this in the notes and I wanted to touch on it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if you have something that's like more relevant, just nothing jumped out at me.
Well, I think arguably you're right? He had he was in an episode of The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. For any of you millennials out there, I remember him in it. But actually, in this time period, I think it was like 2009 to 2014 or 15-ish, Jake Abel had like a little renaissance period in book adaptation movies. So he was in the Lovely Bones movie.
Okay.
In 2009. I looked this up. I don't know this offhand. But he was in this movie. Obviously, he was also in The Sea of Monsters as the same character.
Yeah.
But he was in the movie adaptation of I Am Number 4, and these are all books I've read. That's why I know this. So
yeah, that one I remember hearing. I remember the name of that one.
Yeah, he was more of a minor character, but he was in it. And then he was in the Host, which was Stephanie Meyer's attempt at an adult novel that kind of got swarmed by young adults trying to find a new Twilight. But he was a main character in that movie. And that was actually not a bad movie adaptation, if I remember correctly. I only saw it once, but yeah, that was his kind of this was his hot streak. He didn't really get very big, but he did a lot of that book adaptation sort of thing.
I think the biggest thing that he's like credited for on IMDb is a film called Love and Mercy, which I looked into a little bit, and it's basically a look at like a weird Brian Wilson thing from the Beach Boys, something he'd basically been trying to do as like an avant-garde thing from the 60s all the way up to the 80s or something, and he basically plays somebody in that. He's up there credited under like John Cusack and Paul Giamatti. But yeah, I was like, I can't speak to that at all, and I certainly couldn't have spoken to any of the other things that you highlighted. So, but thank you for bringing that in.
Well,
good context for the young adult sphere.
Yeah, any of you that read a lot of young adult books, me too. Go. That's it.
Yeah. You have Sean Bean and Pierce Brosnan, of course, notably who had come and done Goldeneye together. Sean Bean playing Zeus here. In one of the little bits of trivia I liked is this is one of the few movies in which Sean Bean's character does not die.
He lives. Good on him.
And this was obviously done Goldeneye, done Lord of the Rings. This was a year before Game of Thrones premiered, so he had not yet unleashed Ned Stark and that family onto the world.
That premiered in 2011. Wow.
Yep, 2011. Yep.
Wow.
And then Pierce Brosnan, obviously also Goldeneye. He also, his Chris Columbus connection, because a lot of these people seem to have been pulled into this movie because they'd worked with Chris Columbus in the past, who had done Mrs. Doubtfire. And then he famously had done Mamma Mia and was often laughed as like one of the worst performances in that. But they did it again 10 years later in Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again in 2018 So Pierce Brosnan getting the last laugh. No, he was not great in either of those. No. But also, Mamma Mia is not a great show. I hate that show so much.
Wow,
it's like a fine way to enjoy. It's a fine way to enjoy ABBA, but the story is just garbage.
Oh yeah, but it's a great way to enjoy ABBA.
Yeah, exactly.
So you prefer Rent? Is that what you would say? Because Chris
I mean,
Columbus did Rent.
in the like spectrum of musicals, yeah, I would prefer Rent to Mamma Mia, because historically I do not have the biggest affinity for jukebox musicals, because they almost always have a terrible story behind them. It's like, oh, cool, like I like the music, I like ABBA, I like hearing those songs, but the story of a girl who doesn't know which of these three guys is her dad, so she invites them all to her wedding. It's like, oh my god,
It's a loose plot.
It's a very loose plot, as
Yeah.
you get in many of those kinds of movies. So
Right.
I would prefer Rent, which is aping, admittedly, La Vie Boheme or La Boheme, and Carmen, I think. So yeah, it was one of those like of those two, yeah, I would prefer that. And weirdly, this was I've been listening to Hades Town a lot recently.
Great musical.
Yeah, I only listened to it for the first time like last week, because it's one of those that has like been on my radar for a little while, but just hadn't bothered to sit down with it. But with more ample free time recently, I was like, all right, I'm gonna sit down with this one. And so it was weird diving, especially when we get into like the Hades section of this film, to have Hades Town also playing in my mind.
Sure. Yeah.
Just kind of like, oh, yep, all this Hades stuff is converging at once.
Remind
yeah.
me, if you haven't already listened to it, remind me to tell you about the Elvis musical, because it actually does
All
have
Shook
a
Up?
solid. Yes.
I hate All
like
Shook Up.
Do you?
Yeah,
it's a
I mean,
Shakespearean
it's
story with
it
Elvis
is.
music. I love it.
It's Twelfth Night.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that, but yeah, it's so shamelessly Twelfth Night, but with Elvis music.
Yeah.
That I remember that was like one of the first ones I saw where I was just like, this is just like a paint by numbers script with the music thrown in there that doesn't really tie into anything. It's just like, hey, we're gonna sing an Elvis song now.
I
So
liked it.
I mean,
Plus,
that's
I
fair.
thought some of the composition of the songs was good, which
Yeah,
is not
okay.
relevant to this though.
No, but yeah, it's like I've seen many a jukebox musical.
You are well versed.
and yeah, and All Shook Up is one of those. It was one that I saw, I think, in college. It was one of the first shows I'd seen like at Gamage, which is our big like producing house in town. And I remember seeing that and being like, is this did I just see a show I didn't like? Oh. Oh, I'm glad I only paid like the student rate for that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Shout out
and
to
it
student
might have
rates.
also been that like it didn't have like the strongest cast. But anyway, yeah. Back to speaking of the cast, back to the cast of Percy Jackson here. Steve Coogan, who plays Hades, and obviously continuing that. I had remembered him from Hamlet 2 and Tropic Thunder, and I forgot to jot down the stuff he's done since. But he's been continually working. British comedian who was well known, kind of going into that and whatnot. Kevin McKidd, who's like one that I definitely would not have recognized. But he had done Trainspotting, was one of his larger roles, and then he has also been in Call of Duty Modern Warfare, a couple of games. He's a character in those, which is there's a trivia note on this. It's the game that Luke is playing later on, like when they visit him in the camp, he's playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So it's kind of like a little tie-in of like, oh, and our Poseidon is in that game as well. And then he's also been in Star Wars Rebels. And then you have kind of rounding out, I didn't like bother listing necessarily all their stuff, but you have Rosario Dawson, Joe Pantoliano, Catherine Keener, and Uma Thurman kind of all in here in like very small roles, but like they're certainly notable talents and have kind of all of them have a storied career. And so, yeah, when Uma Thurman showed up as Medusa, I was like, oh, okay.
Man,
they got Uma Thurman to do this.
I forgot she was Medusa. She showed up and I was like, oh shit, that's right. What a weird, yeah.
Yeah. So
Rosario
like
Dawson
again,
has that Chris Columbus connection too, because she
she had done Rent. Yep. And yeah, now she is she might be engaged now to Cory Booker? I don't remember. But
Oh yeah.
she's Cory Booker's partner. So shout out to them. Diving into a little bit of trivia, just kind of picking and choosing in here. In Greek mythology, Medusa was turned into a Gorgon when Poseidon, Percy's father, had sex with her at Athena's temple. That's why Athena, Annabeth's mother, took offense and cursed her, hence Medusa's hatred for both of them, and her reference to unfinished business. As I said, this is one of the few movies where Sean Bean's character does not die. In the original book, Percy is 12 years old. Here he is 17. And this was a sequence that it certainly makes more sense knowing that this was not at all faithful to the book. Because I was like, already when they go to a casino in Vegas, I'm like, they're young, and yet the casino is letting them just run around. That should have been a red flag already. And so like when I saw this, I was like, oh, and in the book he's 12? Well, then that definitely makes no sense. There's definitely not a Vegas sequence in the original book. I get that now.
There is.
Is there?
There is. And you know what? It does track, because in the book it's like God, it's been a while since I read it, but like it was a desperation thing where like they go into the casino, they're like, we just need like water. They've been traveling, they just wanted food because they were super hungry, and then they got sucked into it. But yeah, in the movie, it becomes this bizarre, like, bacchanal free-for-all with weird Lotus cookies, and that is not in the book.
Yeah. It's the Lotus cookies. Cookie drugs.
Yeah,
exactly.
Not in the book. Not in the book.
Yeah, I was like, that was one of the times where I was like, this is a really weird thing to be seeing on Disney Plus.
Yeah, I was so mad. They ruined the Lotus Casino in the book. Was so interesting, and the movie just really, like, I don't know, debases it. It makes it. Yeah. It takes all the like intrigue out of the location and out of that chapter, and it's just like, yeah, I don't know, drug cookies, whatever. Yeah.
Well, at that point they've already done the like, this is the third MacGuffin they're after of the Persephone stone, so they're kind of like, we've already spent a lot of time getting those first two, we really got to rush through this one, so just throw drugs at it.
Yep. Some neon.
This is one of the ones I caught the reference when it came up of the Shakespeare line, but I didn't piece together until I was looking through the trivia after the fact that the substitute teacher comes in and puts in the "I understand a fury in your words, but not your words" from Othello, Act 4, Scene 2 on the blackboard, and then shortly after she turns into a fury. So I didn't catch the foreshadowing that or the tie-in that like she's writing about a fury in your words. Obviously, a play on words there with who she actually is in disguise.
Sure.
This is one, like, Uma Thurman interacted with several live snakes with the help of a snake wrangler in preparation for her role. Handling and holding snakes, she said, helped her imagine how it might feel for Medusa to have live snakes sprouting from her head. Sure. This is what I was just like, actors are weird. And I say that having been an actor for many years. I'm like, I feel like I could have conveyed just as much weird little head movements not ever having done any kind of stuff with live snakes, because I have an imagination. But
she gets real intense there. Like,
she does, yeah. She was definitely like she was chewing the scenery in this movie when in that little scene she's in. So I can appreciate that. This is 3 of the trivia notes that I combined because they all tied into the Call of Duty Modern Warfare. And when Logan and I did the episode for Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire, there was a video game in there that we couldn't identify, and so I was like, I'm going to highlight this one for my audience, for the audience of this one. So Jake Abel, Luke, is seen playing the multiplayer mode of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Kevin McKidd, playing Poseidon, is a voice actor for that video game, which I alluded to earlier. Luke is seen playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 with a PlayStation controller, but on the television screen it shows Xbox controls. Womp womp. And then when Luke is seen, like, somebody jotted this down as a trivia fact. When Luke is seen playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, he is specifically playing for the militia on the favela level. So somebody really knew their Call of Duty when they were watching Percy Jackson and analyzing it for IMDb trivia.
The more you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So this is one going back to kind of the Lotus Eaters casino. It was like I was trying to piece together like what. Because one of the things I did like for all of this movie's failings, like I am such a Greek mythology nerd that I loved there being a Fury and a Minotaur and kind of how they incorporate some of the stuff. Like one of my favorite little bits is that I pieced together Auntie M was Medusa like a couple minutes before it gets revealed. I'm like seeing the statues and like, oh, M is for Medusa, okay, and then like the characters realize it.
All the statues
a couple minutes
looked
later.
Shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially once I like pieced together what was about to happen. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. That's so I love that as like a little reference and how that character is kind of like existing in this world. But I was like, I don't know what these Lotus Eater things are, and so when they talk about kind of the tribe of Lotus Eaters, like I just don't remember that in mythology at all. And so it speaks to this fact and how to your point of like some elements have just been repressed. Like I read the Odyssey, but I did not remember the Lotus Eaters from the Odyssey. And the trivia here is, in classical mythology, the Lotus Eaters are a tribe of people who are in a nearly permanent stupor because they consume the seeds of a plant called lotus, and one of the many obstacles encountered by the hero Odysseus during his adventures in the Odyssey. Like, I was sitting there trying to think, like, are they sirens, and is this how they're like incorporating the siren song into it or something? Yeah. And it's weird that they're doing it through food, but whatever. So I at least was on the right track with the Odyssey. But yeah, it was just like that, like all that stuff and the Hydra and stuff. I was like, okay, yeah, this is Percy Jackson's own little Odyssey going across the country.
Pretty much. The Lotus Eaters aren't in the book. I didn't remember them from mythology either, because they're not in the book. The Lotus Casino just remains a mystery, which I think is kind of intriguing.
Okay.
And you mentioned the Hydra. The Hydra's in book 2, if memory serves. So they took a lot of elements. At some points, it felt like they didn't know how many movies they'd get to make, so they just took the coolest parts of the books and just like kind of pushed them in to the movie as best they could. Because the Hydra does not show up in book 1. It shows up in book 2.
Yeah, and then I if you're looking at the doc, I pulled this last little bit of trivia in here, which is just like a list of changes from the book and the movie. I don't know if there are any of these that are like worth mentioning or highlighting or whatever. So it's just kind of like they
do. The movie changes a lot of the things they fight. It highlights most of the monsters, but they're not all in book 1. What struck me as most noteworthy is that they exclude a lot of characters.
Okay.
You mentioned Clarice LaRue, who is the daughter of Ares. Ares himself and a lot of the other gods make like minor appearances to establish themselves as characters. Obviously, that's hard to do in a movie. Mr.
Or
D,
they just they don't know who they want to cast for those characters yet.
Yeah. Shout out to Hermes.
Yep.
Yeah, not having Mr. D, who is Dionysus. That is most of it. I would say, and it's kind of a deep dive, but like the entire overarching plot of the book series is missing from this movie.
Okay. So
it surprised me that they made a second movie, because this first movie wrapped itself up pretty nicely with the story it told. But this Percy Jackson, the book series, is a 5-book arc that tells the tale. I don't want to spoil it too much, but like the villain is not Luke. He's a bad guy, but like the main villain is not in the movie at all. He's not even mentioned. He's not even thought about. So it's interesting that they really just kind of took the basic framework and made a movie that had kind of nothing to do with the book. So, and I think he does come up in the second movie, maybe. I googled that because I don't remember seeing the second movie, but I think that the plot starts in the second movie and then they never made anything else.
Yeah. Okay.
That was the biggest change for me, is that they just like cut the plot out and changed it entirely.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, given the state of things, I'm sure in 2010, especially with like there's even a line in here of like, we're in a recession or whatever when they burn the money and stuff, and it was like, yeah, they probably didn't know if they were going to get a second shot at that. So, and Marvel certainly hadn't taken off with like building the world and the universe and stuff out. They were still in very early days, so not all the studios were trying to build like their next big franchises and all that stuff. So maybe they were just like, we're gonna do a one shot here and hope that people come to it, and then maybe if it sells well and is super successful, we'll play around with the larger story with the rest of the franchise. And then, looks like they just didn't get the opportunity to after A Sea of Monsters. So, So let's dive into kind of how does the movie hold up, and what did you think? Like we've talked about, like not a great movie, but does it have any kind of charm, or especially I'm curious kind of your take, because you are much more familiar with the source material and all that stuff, and obviously we've already discussed that it strays wildly from it, but
Sure.
what'd you think?
It was pretty much as bad as I remember it being. There's not much that I enjoyed about it, which is too bad. But I wouldn't say it holds up. No, I think that a big part of it is that it falls victim to its time period in a way. Like, there are a lot of CGI special effects because there are a lot of monsters.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But at the time, CGI got like realistic in a way that looked green screened. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In the beginning, the Minotaur's on screen, and he looks realistic, but he also looks fake. Like, he doesn't look like he fits in with the landscape.
Yeah.
I don't know what the technology was like at the time, but there are a lot of moments like that where they have these big, cool CGI things that just look, they look almost out of place. They don't look right. And so I think that contributes a lot to it not holding up super well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If that was one of my kind of big, like, how does it hold up things, is that's an issue on so many things we see, just because of how quickly technology is continuing to evolve and stuff. Like, the CGI now looks infinitely better than the CGI of 10 years ago. And it's one of those things that if I don't know that they could have done it with, like, practical effects and it been as well either. Like, it still probably would have had its issues, because it's a monster movie with a whole bunch of different monsters in the film, and the Fury and the Minotaur and the Hades demon and all sorts of that the Hydra, all that stuff that, like, for a kids movie in 2010 it probably looked fine. But yeah, going back to it, it's like, oh, this would look a lot better if it was made today.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they'd put a lot more care into it, and just the technology has gotten better.
I agree.
Yeah.
I would say beyond
go
that,
ahead.
I know obviously I have a lot of complaints. It's not the book, and I loved the book. And I do, beyond that, there's a lot of, like, it was kind of slow, and I didn't think the stage fighting looked very real, and there was a lot to that. What bothered me the most was the, like, huge plot hole that they established for themselves, where they start off on this quest, and they're like, Luke tells them, he gives them a map, he's like, you're gonna find the 3 pearls of Persephone, and they'll magically whisk you to wherever you want to go, and they changed the plot from what it was to being a collectible mission, basically. But from the get-go, they're like, yes, we will have these 3 pearls for our 3 adventurers, plus the 1 person we're trying to save, which is 4 people.
Yeah.
So there will not be enough pearls, and they never, ever, ever think about that. And then they get to the end, and it's like, oh no, we have to leave someone behind. But that's established an hour and a half ago. And that drove me, more than anything, that drove me crazy, because just, like, that is basic math. That's kindergarten shit. And the whole movie is based on the premise of 3, and there's 4. And so that, like, just drove me fully out of the movie kind of the whole time.
Yeah, there was that, and then there's another moment at the end when Poseidon, or when Percy's, like, pissed off that Poseidon hasn't, like, seen him or whatever, and he's like, why didn't you come back or whatever? Like, yeah, like, I took the note, why didn't you ever come back? And like, I just wanted Poseidon to say, because Zeus declared we can't. Weren't you paying attention when that came up as a plot point an hour ago in the film?
Because I'm a
like,
god?
Yeah, because we were told we cannot see our children.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure your friend Annabeth told you that an hour ago when she talked about why she hasn't met her mom. Like,
right.
Why are you asking this question, and which you already know the answer to? There were a couple of those where it was just like they definitely did not have, like, a proofreading pass at the script to make sure that what they set up ties to how they ended things.
Yeah. To that point, they give you a villain whose main reason is that, like, I've never met my dad, so I'm angry. I'm like, right, daddy issues, we get it, but now you have one other character and she's fine with it, and that's all the context we get. and that doesn't really work for me either, because the villain, like, it just seemed like he had no good reason. He was like, I don't know, I did it because I don't like my dad, and no one here likes their parents, but I turned evil because of it, and you've only met me in 2 scenes. Okay.
Yeah, that's my first note, having not seen this movie before, on Luke is Luke, son of Hermes, immediately seems like the bad guy pretending to be friendly.
Yeah.
And then we get the scene of him gaming and giving them all this stuff to the underworld, and then yeah, they, like, when the lightning bolt is revealed to be in the shield that Luke was doing the framing. I was like, the lightning bolt was in the shield. Luke was framing him. Called it.
Yep, and he has that line too, like, he gives him the shoes and he's like, I stole these from my dad. I'm like, oh, cool, you stole from a god, and they're looking for the item stolen from a god, but you're probably cool. Like, it doesn't set itself up very well as a movie.
You've established yourself as a thief. Could you also be the lightning thief? Probably. Man,
and they said the lightning thief too many times. Like, at least twice, which is 2 times too many.
Yeah, I did. My one of my last little notes on Luke was I appreciated that his, like, villain monologue at the end. I basically said Luke's speech is effectively "Okay, Boomer," but in 2010. Because he's like, the old gods need to, like, they've ruined everything. They need to die, and it needs to be our time to rise up. And I was just like, yep, this is peak OK Boomer.
Yeah, I hesitate to say it's convincing, but maybe.
Yeah. So our friend Alex O'Neill asks, will Percy Jackson actually ever be cool, or is that the myth? He tweeted that out at us when we talked about that you will be joining the show. So what do you think about that? Do you think Percy Jackson, in some kind of future, they'll take another stab at this and they'll get a good movie out of it, or is that just not going to happen, and enjoy the books?
I want to say Percy Jackson's always been cool, but that's because I read the books. I know they made a Percy Jackson musical that I didn't invest much time into researching.
A friend of mine, I was in Romeo and Juliet a number of years ago as Romeo, and the girl who played my Juliet, she was in the, like, off-Broadway version of Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief.
Yeah.
Like, I remember seeing, like, her Instagram posts about it and being like, oh, that's cool. Again, not like knowing the Percy Jackson name, but not knowing anything about the show. So she was in it, and she was having a great time with it. So I think it did well for what it was.
It wasn't, like, the most popular thing on Broadway. My friends and I meant to go, and we kind of never got it together, but it had a pretty good run. So maybe that's cool. I don't know. I would have to look more into it. I imagine that's one of those things that's going to really depend on how good your stage effects are. Yep. To me, I think this book series feels the same as, like, I think a lot of people feel this way about Harry Potter. I'm going to project for a moment onto everybody and assume they feel like I feel. The movies were not ideal. And you so desperately want, you're like, man, if they made it a TV show and they put the time in, like, I would watch 27 hours of just book 1. Like, I want to see every detail. That would be cool. And that's how I feel about Percy Jackson, where I'm like, if they made some sort of, you know, movie, TV show, whatever, to the letter of the books, I would watch it. It would be so cool. But it's so hard to condense stories like this into 2-hour snippets. This was bad. This was a terrible adaptation, and I wouldn't say that they did a good job in the 2 hours they had, because they didn't. Like I said, it's a completely different plot with the same characters, and it's not very good. Yeah, but it's hard to do what they're doing. So I think it could be cool if they redid it. I would love to see them do it, you know, page by page. That's never going to happen for anything. It could be cool. That just reminded me, in kind of doing some research on this, I had seen this. Rick Riordan, the writer of the books, on December 12th had tweeted out, "Had some good meetings at Disney today. Way too early to know if anything might happen, but I will keep at it. At least they knew me by my name at the security gates." And then basically it was zoom in on my name tag to see what I mean, and if you zoom in on the name tag, it's he was there. He's holding, like, a Disney Plus button. So it seems to be in talks of, or he was pitching it probably as a series. So maybe we'll get a Disney Plus series out of it. I would love that. He does have a few book series, I'll say. Percy Jackson is certainly the one that had the most traction, but I know he had one about Egyptian gods. He had a tie-in series about Roman gods that featured a couple of the characters from the Lightning Thief series, because Greek and Roman gods are the same. But presumably it was a meeting about Percy Jackson because that's his most known works, and that would be dope. And I would watch that like voraciously as soon as it came out. I'd be all over it, just to see if they got it right. This is a series that I treasure, and I think most people have series like that where it's from their childhood and they still love it. And I started rereading it today because I watched the movie, and it holds up very well so far. So yeah, I'd watch it for sure.
Unrelated to this, but the biggest analog I have to something like this is the series of Unfortunate Events, because around the same time or whatever, I remembered like they had made back when they made the Jim Carrey movie. I got into those books and started reading them, and I was like, oh, like this would be way better if it had more focus on the kids as opposed to Jim Carrey, as opposed to it being a vehicle for Jim Carrey. And so when those movies went nowhere, a la Percy Jackson really going nowhere, I was like, oh, that sucks. But then they got to have a new life on Netflix, and I really enjoyed that series. Neil Patrick Harris still is like the star and centerpiece, but he also he lets the kids shine, I think, a lot more in that version. So yeah, like I'm hopeful that they kind of take lessons from that kind of stuff and yeah, give this show or give this IP another shot.
That'd be great.
And if they do, we will definitely have you back on and we will talk about the show.
Appreciate it. I would say too, I assume they wouldn't be afraid to cast younger actors. Nothing against the cast, and apparently they were supposed to be 17 in the movie, which went fully over my head. But I remember going to the theater, seeing it, and thinking like they're supposed to be 12, and seeing Alexandra Daddario and being like, she's like 20, like she clearly doesn't look right. So it would be cool to see them redo it and use younger actors just for the sake of having a little more continuity, but also for some freshness.
Yeah, nice. And so 5 books. Does that take place over like 5 years? Is it the kind of thing that like a Harry Potter that the kids could grow up as they do the show?
Yes. So sort of reverse of Harry Potter, where Harry Potter takes place every school year. The Percy Jackson series takes place every summer because it's a summer camp. Yeah. So book 1 is summer 1, and it goes from there. But yeah, in book 1 they are 12, and by book 5 they are 17 or getting there.
Okay. That reminds me, there was another trivia piece that I didn't pull in here, but apparently there is a real Half-Blood camp that has been like created somewhere out there in the New York area.
That doesn't
they've
surprise
made
me.
a Half-Blood summer camp. So fans of the book series rejoice. So let's talk about does this movie have any redeeming moments, any favorite scenes for you? Or if not, we can just dive into some of the most cringy things that you want to talk about. So what do you have? Do you have any moments that really stand out as like that was a good moment in this movie?
I think that it has a gorgeous set for the most part, like location wise. I know when I think he's talking to Grover and Chiron, and like they're on the beach or on a cliff or whatever, but like this whole backdrop of like rolling hills in front of the lake, like that was gorgeous. That stood out for me. There are like little acting moments, I guess. In the very, very beginning, he gets the pen sword to defeat Mrs. Dodds. And I know he says like, this is a pen. This is a pen. And that's directly from the book. And that was a moment like that delighted me, because even reading that line, I was like, that's super funny, but that's absolutely how someone would react. Just to be like so baffled. So I thought that was a treat. I think I had high expectations because of the book. This go around, I tried to watch it objectively, just as a movie, but even then, there was not much. I think them going into the Lotus Casino was another favorite, just because of the lights and the color and like the visual aspect of it was very arresting, which is obviously the point.
Yeah.
So.
A couple moments for me, like I like I said earlier, I really enjoyed the anti-M sequence and all
Oh
the Medusa
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
In part because I felt clever for like picking up on it like a minute before the characters did. And obviously like that's not saying a lot for me being a slightly smarter than a young adult movie,
Well.
but it was still like, oh, that was a cool moment. And then yeah, seeing Uma Thurman pop up for it and being like, oh,
Yeah.
that's who they got as Medusa. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, sure,
Yeah.
whatever, I'm in. One of the it's like a small thing, but just given like my enjoyment and reverence for Greek mythology, I love the kind of like unstated thing that like there's a shit ton of kids at this summer camp, which obviously means that the gods still be fucking like crazy.
Hell
So
yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, they are still getting it on with just everybody apparently, because there are all these kids that we're never gonna know, but theoretically they're all demigods or some kind of semblance of related to a Greek god. So
The movie does a
yeah,
good job of setting that up without meeting too many people.
yeah,
'Cause like I said, obviously the book can go more in depth. It has that option, but like showing how packed that camp was did a very good job of showing that, like, yeah, the gods are absolutely still hooking up. Like nothing
Yeah.
changes.
yeah. I kind of agree with you. One of the things you said earlier about like the sword fighting and stuff was very underwhelming, and especially as somebody who like studied and has like choreographed stage fights and stuff. I was like, oh, this could have been like a lot better.
I knew you would understand this. There were moments where it looked too slow. Like they just hadn't practiced enough, where it looked like they were swinging with the intent to not hit somebody so they'd match up
Yeah,
properly. And
mean,
it was
it
just
was
very it really took me out of the moment personally, where it was like, if you'd been able to like go faster or like commit more knowing that you wouldn't hurt somebody, it would look way cooler. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there were even moments that just looked like they just said, okay, the choreographer is like off today, so just go ahead and like make something up, and we'll shoot at different angles, we'll cut around a lot or whatever, because it just looked like, yeah, it was like, I mean, like Percy, I get because you've never held a sword before,
Right,
fine,
he's new.
but if Annabeth's whole thing is that she has been training for her entire life, she should be way more practiced at it, and it's another thing that I think, given where like especially like the influence of superhero movies that we've had in the last 10 years, I think that would be much more tightened,
Yeah.
and it would be designed to be much more impressive, because you can get like YouTubers out there that are putting on more convincing sword fights than what we saw here. So yeah, that was one of the things that I thought was a little like, I was like, oh, this should have been like better. It's not like a super weak or super great moment, but it stood out to me as like, oh, this should have been cooler. But yeah, I agree with you in that like there was a lot of pacing stuff in this that it was slow. It felt like it took forever to get to the camp, and I don't know, like they have to set up some semblance of Percy doesn't know he's weird and he has this like secret life or whatever. But I feel like they still, like, I don't think they get a lot of they get a lot of mileage out of that. So I think they could have like cut out a couple scenes to get to the action faster. And then yeah, just the fact that it is okay, go collect these 3 things. So that basically sets out the beats of the rest of this movie of, okay, we're going to have a set piece around Persephone's Pearl 1 and then Pearl 2 and then Pearl 3. And none of them felt like overly rewarding. So I would have probably appreciated condensing down the MacGuffins for a more exciting quest to
Yeah.
get the one thing that they need.
Well, and in the book, not to keep harping on this, but like
No.
that's not what they're after. Like in the book, the whole quest is just like get to the underworld. We're just gonna go ahead and spoil the book. It's been out for long enough. I assume you've all
Sounds
read it
good.
or you haven't. In the book, everyone thinks that Hades stole the lightning bolt. So they're like, Percy's like, I'm gonna go to the underworld. I'm gonna get my mom. I'm gonna get the lightning bolt, and I'm gonna bring it back to Zeus. That's it. So there are no pearls involved. Like they're just traveling cross country to go from New York to California. Just 2 12-year-olds and a goat trying to like get there. So the whole
I
pearl
did appreciate That did remind me. I did appreciate that. Of course, the path to Hades is through the Hollywood sign.
It is in
like,
Hollywood in the book, so that
yeah.
seems it's appropriate.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, they made a plot out of nothing. Like, the pearls exist, but they don't do the same thing in the book as in the movie. So as the movie, they really became the savior of everything, and they just kind of exist in the book, and they still have to go through all the trials. So when we saw it, I remember being really upset because it wasn't the plot at all. And like I said, the villain doesn't even show up in the movie the way he does.
Yeah, there was a lot of that stuff where it was just like, what was their plan? Their plan is basically go to Hades and convince him that he doesn't have the lightning bolt.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
What? Like, what?
Presumably, the leader of hell will listen to me and my honesty and let me live.
Yeah, no, that'll totally work out. So yeah, it was a little rough. One of the other minor little things I did enjoy was in the Lotus Casino. Two things actually. I enjoyed that like he starts coming to and basically pieces it together because there's a whole bunch of like retro arcade games that people are playing, and and that's how he learns that people have been there since the 70s and stuff. Because the guy is playing a French Connection pinball game. I was like, okay, that's a super deep cut.
Yeah.
That's somebody really loves the French Connection and wanted to give it some due there. Cool. But then also when they're going through, I'm like, oh, that Maserati is going to somehow come into play. It's being way too like prevalently showcased to not be and so I basically made a note of like Chekhov's Maserati comes into play and we'll get them to Hollywood in a few hours, because like this was another thing that like the whole movie is set out in the opening scene of like, you've got 2 weeks. This is a 2-week timeline, and I did give the opening scene a little bit of credit in how efficiently it sets up like, here's the timeline, here's the conflict, here's the threat, and here's like the mystery of Percy Jackson. But like, so 2 weeks happens. He loses 3 days into a coma after the Minotaur fight. They lose another 5 days. Like they just play fast and loose with the time in a lot of this stuff. Yeah. The most egregious of which being like, we've got 10 minutes to get to Olympus, and then Luke comes in and they have their whole fight. And I'm like, okay, well that was definitely more than 10 minutes. But he gets there. He's like, we've only got 2 minutes left. I'm like, okay, fine. We're giving you that it's 2 minutes, but it's definitely gonna take you more than 2 minutes to get from the elevator thing that you're getting off at to the Olympus, throne room at the end of the mountain or whatever.
Where they run a 2-minute mile. Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem super valid, but
it was just like, what, like, just don't include those little time callouts. To if they're just gonna break the reality of the movie, just like cut those lines and you'll be fine. Like, we get that. Oh, it's got to happen fast. You don't have to say how fast, but yeah. So yeah, let us. One last little thing I do want to give it a little bit of credit on, and it's probably like this in the books too. I did appreciate that it doesn't end with like Percy and Annabeth like, you know, falling in love and kissing or whatever. Like, you obviously that's clearly where it's going, but I did appreciate that she uses like that to steal his sword in their like final little fight. It was like, okay, that was a very, it seems like a very progressive moment for a 2010 movie to not have it end in like the guy kissing the girl.
I agree.
And she kind of uses that to her advantage. So yeah. So let's dive into the report card, where we give the movie a grade from A+ to F. So where on the scale of things would you grade Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, Jazz?
God, it's bad. If I'm grading it as a book adaptation, it's absolutely an F, because it takes the names and that's about it. Like, it misses so many of the plot points. If I'm grading it just as a movie, it's still not good. But it's not an F. It's probably, I don't know, C- or D+. There were moments that were interesting, but on the whole, it just felt like it dragged, and it never fully immersed me. And that meant that I was distracted by other things, and if you're not going to pay attention to a movie, what's the point?
Yeah.
The plot wasn't cohesive, and it was like watching a video game being played, because it was like a collect 'em all achievement, for almost an hour of the movie, and that is not interesting. But the cast was super stellar, even if their acting wasn't the best that they've ever been. That first scene, for all that it set up the movie, that first scene with Kevin McKidd and Sean Bean was just awkward. Like, it just wasn't well acted to me. So, I don't know. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen, but it wasn't close to the best. So it's probably a D-. It's not great.
Okay, yeah, I was sitting myself in C- D+ territory as well. I like, especially it's interesting because like I've seen plenty of the like Disney Channel original movies here in the series, and I kind of always grade those on a curve because it's like, as a movie, this is clearly not a good movie. I get that, but as a Disney Channel original movie, I'll give it blah blah blah. Yeah. So here, like, judging it as like a young adult movie, kind of be like putting it on that curve, I'm like, I like enough of the Greek mythology that they play with that it scores a little bit of points here and there because of that. And I like that they were trying to bring that into kind of a popular culture world.
And they are faithful to most of the mythology. They play that correctly. So. Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, I'll lean on just for the sake of the show name, I will go ahead and throw it in the D+ category myself.
Hell yeah.
So that's our grades on this one. Diving into extra credit, other suggestions if you like this one. If you are a fan of Percy Jackson, we have just totally rained on your parade for the last hour or whatever. I apologize, but other things that you might like, suggestions from Disney Plus itself, are The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the live-action Alice in Wonderland, Wizards of Waverly Place, the movie, Descendants 3, Avalon High, Skyrunners, Pete's Dragon, the live-action one, which I had completely forgotten was a movie.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, that's right. They did make a live-action Pete's Dragon. Yeah. It was like it kind of was one of the precursors to Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and The Lion King live-action versions. And then lastly, Dr. Dolittle 2, which, like, that one jumped out at me as like, that's the weird one. That's the oddball out of this group. But yeah, so you can check out any of those on Disney Plus if you liked this one, or if you didn't like this one and want a better movie. I would say at least a couple of those would fall in the better camp.
Yep.
Diving into extracurriculars, are you watching anything else? Have you been watching anything else on Disney Plus there, Jazz?
Yeah, so the Lilo and Stitch TV series is on Disney Plus.
Yep.
As are all the Lilo and Stitch movies, which is my favorite Disney movie. So I've been getting into those. I
need to get you and Ben together for an episode on Lilo and Stitch, because he loves that one as well.
I think it would be chaos.
I mean, like he is every time he and I go to Disneyland, we go into the animation studio where they just kind of like have a 20-minute reel of movie animation cinematics and stuff along with the music, and we always have to sit in there for him to hear the Lilo and Stitch portion of it, because it is his favorite, I think, of the 2D animated Disneys.
Hell yeah! I actually would.
So I think it'd be a fun episode to get you guys together on.
I would love to. I have a whole thesis on why Nani is actually the best Disney princess. But the TV show's on there, so I've been going through that because I have fond memories of it. I was gonna watch Now You See It, which is a Disney. I think it's a Disney Channel original. It may have just been a Disney movie, but it's a movie that like most people convinced me didn't exist because so few people saw it that like no one remembers it when I talk about it. But it's real, and it's on Disney Plus. So I was gonna watch that.
Yeah.
And I was gonna watch.
Is that Alyssa Michalka or whatever?
Ally Michalka. Yeah. It's like the magician movie. Yes.
Yeah.
No one saw it, but I saw it.
I mean, I'm just Googling it and I'm like, I recognize her. So.
Okay, well, it was real, and it was that nerdy kid with the curly hair whose name doesn't matter, and she was in it, and it's a good movie. about
Yeah.
magicians. And I was gonna watch Twitches because I have fond memories of that as well.
Nice. That has come up a couple times on the extra
Has
credit
it?
section. Yeah,
Twitches
for
is
the
a good movie, man.
when I think it was both of the movies Logan came on and talked about with Phantom of the Megaplex and Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire. It was one of the recommended
Twitches, really?
movies. Yeah,
That makes
because it's
sense.
basically like here are all the Disney Channel original Halloween movies.
Yeah.
Twitches.
That
It's
tracks.
it's Twin Witches. Boom.
It's a good movie. I would recommend it if you've got time to kill. It's not like
Yeah.
highbrow, but it's entertaining.
I love the just the idea that like you had seen this movie and were convinced it was a real movie, but like nobody else had seen it. Because I had the exact same experience. Mine is with a much older film, and it even the movie predates me. But it's like the very first movie I ever like have memories of seeing in theaters was the original The Rescuers movie, which like I was like, no, it's these mice and there's like an evil alligator and this swamp lady and whatnot, and like nobody in my family, like my whole family was like that's not a real thing. But when I saw The Rescuers years later, I was like, no, this was the movie. And so what I'm convinced had happened was like one of the local movie theaters was just doing like, hey, it's a Saturday, bring your kids in, and we're playing an old movie, an old Disney movie or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was how I got like introduced to it. But like for the longest time, it was like I would talk about that movie, and my family would be like, that's not a real thing. What are you talking about? So
Yes.
I was like, stop gaslighting me, family.
This-
When I was 5.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what happened to me. Where it was like I watched it on Disney Channel, but I think it just wasn't popular enough to be in a regular rotation. So it would play like once a year. I'd be like, this is the movie. No one believed me. Now you see it as a great movie, kids. We should all watch it. It's about real magic and also about television production. So it's diverse.
There you go.
Yeah.
In terms of anything I've been watching, I keep watching. I'm keeping up with the Clone Wars new season. Enjoying that little arc that they've kind of been playing with there. I need to reach out to some people who basically have wanted to be on the show for DuckTales, because I've been watching the new version of DuckTales and really enjoying that. So that's what I've been watching on Disney Plus.
Only thing I know about the new DuckTales is Lin-Manuel Miranda did music for it.
Yep, he did some music for it, and he is in there as Gizmo Duck, I think. He has like a minor role as one of the side characters. Like the first episode I ever saw of it actually was I was at Disneyland with Ben and our friend Lauren, and we were staying in Paradise Pier hotel. I was basically like treating them because like Ben had just graduated and Lauren had just gotten a new job, and so I was like we've been doing this. This is probably going to be our last Disney trip for a while because my annual pass and a couple others was about done. So I was like, I'm splurging. We're going to stay at Paradise Pier. And we took like a break from wandering the park one day, went back to the hotel. Super great to have like a hotel that you could just like walk back to and crash for a little bit. Yeah. And we threw that on and we like, I threw on an episode of DuckTales and we watched the whole thing. And I picked up very early on that it was Lin-Manuel Miranda, and Ben didn't pick it up until like the end of the episode, and I was like, yeah, it's been him the whole time. Were you not? Did you not catch that?
Nice.
He's like, I just he was very out of it, but so yeah, he's in there every now and then, and yeah, it's a cool little revised approach to the show. One of the things that I really appreciate about it is they made a concerted effort to make Huey, Dewey, and Louie all like individual characters, as opposed to just it's Huey, Dewey, and Louie.
Yeah.
So they each have their own personalities and kind of their own mini arcs and stuff that they deal with, and it's really cool.
Nice.
So I think they're doing a great job, kind of exploring a wider array of those characters.
Awesome.
And as somebody who like grew up with the original series, it's cool seeing how they reinterpret and reintroduce characters from like the Scrooge McDuck mythos and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good one. I've got a couple people that want to come talk about it on the show, so I'll try and reach out and get them on in a future episode. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you, Jazz, for joining me to talk about Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Lightning Thief.
Thank you.
I'm sorry it wasn't a better time for you.
Yeah,
but
well, it wasn't good when I saw it when I was 15 or 16, so it's what it is.
Yeah. You kind of knew going into it what it might be. You can follow Jazz at Jazz_Foster. Anything you want to plug or shout out, Jazz? We haven't had a BS blog from you in a little while or anything on the site, but obviously it's always great having you pop in there and throw some stuff out there. So
thank you.
I don't know if you have anything in the works or that you can kind of keep an eye out for.
I have a good backlog of BS blogs coming. It's just been an unfortunate time because, especially recently, we're in a pandemic and restaurants might be shutting down. So, do I have a job? We don't know. But I've got a lot of stuff coming up, so hopefully we'll see that soon enough. Otherwise, I'm on Twitter, like Trevor said, at Jazz_Foster, mostly tweeting selfies and snarky commentary, which is what Trevor was good for until he became an adult. So, I guess I'm taking up Trevor's mantle. Snarky.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. Somebody's got to keep the snark alive.
And I would love to. I'd be honored.
I bequeath the title onto you.
Nice.
Absolutely.
I'm putting that in my Twitter bio.
There you go. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. Yes, formerly Snarky Starkey, but now Trevor J. Starkey. When I decided, hey, maybe I don't need to be snarky as like the first impression for people who are meeting me on the internet. We're still doing the occasional PAX East content that's still rolling out, so keep an eye out to that nerdy site for that stuff.
And it's
then
been
just
fantastic. You guys have been doing a really good
Thank you.
job with previews and stuff. Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew we'd be going out there and we'd have a good handle on like some writing stuff, but I'm really happy with how kind of our one-on-one or kind of roundtable conversations around some of the games turned out, and Frank in particular has been doing a great job editing those together with some game footage kind of to go along with us talking about the stuff we got to see and play. So yeah, shout out to Frank on that, which you can catch out those videos over at youtube.com/thatnerdysite. And yeah, you can follow all the stuff we're doing over at That Nerdy Site, thatnerdysite.com, patreon.com/thatnerdysite. If you would like to be part of the show, you can go to thatnerdysite.com/D+guest, fill out a little Google form there, let us know kind of what Disney Plus offering you would like to come on and chat about, and I will be in touch to invite people on here especially now that we might have ample free time. It's a great time to try and podcast with friends around the globe. So yeah, yay, coronavirus and concerns and all that fun stuff. Hooray. I hope everybody's being safe. Take care of yourselves. If you did like what you hear, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, and all that stuff. And as I said, if you feel so inclined, you can always support us on Patreon, patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Help us kind of keep the lights on for the site and all the podcast feeds and all that stuff. So thank you again for joining me, Jazz. Thank you, listener, for joining us. And as always, stay nerdy and be good to each other. Class dismissed.